The story begins in the year 1979, where we see our hero Snow, who used to be a CIA agent. At this time, in a high-security American prison, the director of the Secret Service, Scott Langral, was interrogating him. Langral kept asking repeatedly what had happened in that room in New York with the colonel. But in response to every question, Snow would crack a joke, and he had to pay for each joke by getting punched hard. Now the story goes a little back in time. Here, Snow was in a cheap motel room where a stranger was strangling him. But Snow is not one to give up easily, so he was fighting back with all his might. Just then, the man started slamming him hard onto the table, and at that moment, Snow's phone rang. It was a call from his friend Mace. Now, Snow attacked the man with his head, pushing him off, and immediately turned around to fight back. As they fought, the two of them completely trashed the room. Finally, Snow somehow managed to grab the gun and shot his enemy. After that, the man fell to the ground where there were already two other bodies lying. Finally, Snow picked up the phone. In a tense voice, Mace told him that he was surrounded from all sides. "You have to get out of there as quickly as possible." Snow got down on his knees and went over to the colonel. The colonel handed him his lighter and said that it must not fall into their hands. Snow looked at the briefcase lying nearby and said that everything would be all right. But at that very moment, the colonel breathed his last. Now, just as Snow was about to pick up the briefcase, the sound of sirens outside signaled that the police had arrived. Snow used the mattress to outsmart the police officers. He hit them hard and ran out of the room, heading straight to the roof, where he had no choice but to jump. He landed directly on the ground below with the briefcase still by his side. He immediately grabbed the briefcase and started running because the police were now after him. Just then, he spotted a bike and, without wasting a second, stole it. Now he was speeding down the highway on the bike. Meanwhile, he got a call from Mace. Mace told Snow to meet him at the subway and also to immediately throw away his phone because the police were tracking him. Without wasting any time, Snow dropped the phone, and at that very moment, the helicopter chasing him suddenly exploded with a blast. Then, as soon as the subway station came into view, Snow rode the bike straight inside and jumped off before it could fall onto the railway tracks. He then ran through the station and reached platform number 10, exactly at the moment when the train was about to leave. A second before the doors closed, he threw the briefcase inside, which Mace caught just in time. But just then, the police arrived from behind and arrested him. Now the story returned to the present day. That is, when Snow was in jail. Langral told him that the colonel had been placed under surveillance because he was selling the secrets of the space program. But here, Snow believed that the colonel was actually protecting those secrets. However, Langral had already made up his mind that it was Snow who had killed the colonel. When Snow denied this, Langral showed a short clip from the motel room in which Snow was seen standing behind the colonel and firing a gun, and the colonel fell to the ground. Snow said that this is not the truth, but how could Langral deny what he had seen with his own eyes? The questions kept coming, but Snow did not answer a single one. Just then, the door to the room opened and a new officer entered, whose name was Harry Shaw. Shaw then took Langral's place and said, "I'll take it from here." At that point, Snow began to tell Shaw that he wanted something he had last seen on the train. Another flashback began, and we see that Mace got off the train and went straight to the station lockers where he hid the briefcase. But luck was not on his side. A policeman noticed the keychain hanging on the locker, which Mace had accidentally left behind. Panicking, Mace tried to leave, but in his haste, he bumped into a man. The collision caused his gun to slip from his hand and fall to the ground, and suddenly it went off, hitting a policeman directly. After that, another officer, without any delay, shot Mace and apprehended him. Now, in the interrogation room, Shaw asked Snow who his backup partner was. Snow shouted that he wouldn't tell because Shaw would just go and report it straight to his boss. But at the same time, he secretly wrote Mace's name on the table using the ash from a cigarette. Now Shaw understood everything. Without making it obvious, he wiped away the ash and ended the interrogation right there. After this, we see the president's daughter, Emily. At this moment, she was traveling somewhere in a spaceship. Her bodyguard, Hawk, and her friend, Catherine, were with her as well. Some police officers were also traveling with them, including the prison warden, Vance. They were headed to a high-security space jail called MS-1, where about 500 prisoners were being held, and no one had ever escaped from there. Vance explained that once this jail is fully operational, it will be able to hold 500,000 criminals. Barnes explained that MS-1 is the only jail in the world where there has never been any violence or riots because the prisoners here are put to sleep using special technology. This was exactly what was troubling Emily. In fact, reports had come in that this technology, called status, affects people's minds. They even start to forget their memories. But Barnes said that the press just publishes anything, ma'am. He also mentioned that the jail's defense system is equipped with very advanced weapons. Now they finally managed to get inside. After going through a routine security procedure, they took the elevator to the 3rd floor. Emily asked Barnes if the real purpose of this jail was to observe what happens to humans when they spend extended periods in space. To this, Barnes replied, "Ma'am, I didn't build this jail. I just work here. I don't know much more than that." Then Barnes took them to see the prisoners who were sleeping deeply in their stasis capsules. He explained that an interview room had been prepared for them, but weapons were not allowed there. Still, Hawk hid his gun under his pants. Now we return to Earth where we see Snow, who is still locked up inside that jail. Langral came to meet him and informed him that he had already been sentenced to be sent to the MS-1 jail. After a while, he was dragged into another room where he was about to be injected with something. Meanwhile, on MS-1, Emily was introduced to a mad and dangerous prisoner named Heidel. Emily tried to ask him some questions, but Heidel wasn't paying any attention to her at all. Hawk didn't like this at all, and to control the prisoner, he slammed his head hard onto the table. But Heidel took advantage of the situation and stole Hawk's hidden gun. Pushing Hawk aside, he fired at a part of the wall, causing a massive explosion there. The blast shook everyone in the room and Hawk was knocked unconscious. But Heidel wasn't even a little bit scared. He shot at the chains on his feet to free himself and ran straight after Emily, who was already trying to escape from the room. Heidel shot her in the leg, but Emily managed to close the door in between and somehow escaped from there. Then we see a space police ship where alarms had started ringing and they had already received a warning about the fire on MS-1. Meanwhile, Emily entered the control room, told a scientist to hide and then hid herself as well. But soon, Heidel also entered that control room. He pointed his gun at the scientist and angrily asked where Emily was. The scientist was very confused. He couldn't understand anything at all. When he didn't get any answer, Heidel became even more furious. He shoved the scientist hard, causing him to fall onto the control panel's buttons and accidentally activated the control room. As soon as Heidel realized what had happened, he immediately grabbed the scientist and forced him to release all the prisoners from their capsules. Then, as soon as the job was done, Heidel shot him without hesitation. After that, he started pretending to leave the room, putting on a dramatic act. But just moments later, he appeared right in front of Emily. Now, chaos had erupted throughout the entire jail. The prisoners who had been sleeping until now were now free, causing destruction and riots everywhere. Meanwhile, Heidel's brother Alex was also in a capsule. When the guards passed by him, he pretended to be asleep. As soon as the guards moved ahead, he suddenly attacked them from behind. He knocked them unconscious and stole their weapons. Meanwhile, in the interrogation room, Hawk regained consciousness. He immediately realized that something terrible had happened. That's why he immediately sent a message to Langral. Meanwhile, in the control room, Heidel had caught Emily. He forcefully pinned Emily down on the table. He was trying to assault her. Just then, Alex arrived, who had become the leader of a small group of prisoners. He stopped Heidel and said that we have to face the police. For that, we'll need hostages. We can use this girl as a shield. At that moment, the police tried to make contact with the prisoners. Just then, Alex saw the police spaceship approaching them on the screen and realized they were surrounded. Now, Heidel grabbed another scientist and ordered him to activate the security system, but out of fear, the scientist pressed a big red button which activated the weapons of that advanced jail and it started firing at the police ships themselves. Meanwhile, Langral and Shaw went to the White House to meet the president and informed him about the situation on MS-1. The president was extremely worried about his daughter, but because of a chip implanted in Emily's body, he knows that at least she is still alive. That device constantly tracks Emily's body. Now Langral wanted to send in the special forces directly, but Shaw said they should think it through first. He explained that if soldiers were sent, Emily's life could be in danger. Then he suggested another plan in which only one person could do the job. He was clearly referring to Snow. But when he was asked if he would help save the president's daughter, he flatly refused. However, as soon as Shaw casually mentioned that Mace was also in that jail, Snow changed his mind. Now he agreed to save the girl. Then, thanking him, Shaw returned the colonel's lighter to him. Meanwhile, in the MS-1 jail, all the inmates had been locked up in a single room and the criminals had also taken their IDs. Emily was feeling cold, so Catherine gave her the lab coat hanging nearby to wear. Meanwhile, on Earth, Snow, Langral and Shaw were sitting in a spaceship discussing the plan. Snow was told about a device called telemetry, which is fitted inside the girl's body, and also about an escape pod located on the 5th floor of the jail, which he must use to bring the girl back. Then, he was also given a map of the jail so that he could reach the pod. Along with this, he was also given some bombs to use during the mission. Meanwhile, in the MS-1 jail, Alex's hand was injured during a fight. That's why he asked for a doctor to be called. One of his men went to the prisoner's room, where Catherine was bandaging Emily's leg. Emily was wearing a lab coat, so the man thought she was the doctor. He then grabbed her and took her straight to Alex. Emily, understanding the situation, pretended to cooperate and began treating Alex as if she were the doctor. Meanwhile, Snow, Langral and Shaw had reached the LOPD spaceship and now Langral took command. Then an officer informed him that Alex had demanded a negotiator. Langral tried to talk to him, but Alex hung up the call. But they had seen Emily standing next to Alex on the screen. And since Alex hadn't mentioned her name or identity, Snow immediately realized that they had no idea she was the president's daughter. They thought she was just an ordinary girl. Just then, Alex suddenly appeared on their screen again. He said in a cold tone that he was about to give them a small demonstration. Then he grabbed Barnes and threw him straight out into space to die. At the same time, Alex warned them that there would be another show in an hour. It was decided that Langral would try to negotiate with the prisoners, while Shaw and Snow would continue the mission. Meanwhile, a police officer was sent to MS-1 as a negotiator. He spoke to Alex in private and explained that if he released at least one hostage, it would help build some trust between them. The negotiations could go somewhere. Alex agreed to this, and the officer suggested that releasing an injured woman would be the best option. At this, Alex immediately mentioned Emily's name, but Heidel liked her. He didn't want to let her go. Now, since they had to release an injured woman, he immediately shot Catherine so that she could be sent instead. But she died right there. At that very moment, Snow got the chance to board the ship. But one of the prisoners saw him and immediately warned Alex that this could all be a trap. Then, without thinking, Alex shot the negotiator and ordered his brother to find and eliminate the man who had entered the ship. Meanwhile, Shaw was guiding the way and Snow, following his instructions, entered the ship. Now Alex found a digital newspaper, and when he saw Emily's real identity, he was shocked. Now he realized that she was the president's daughter. At that moment, Emily was in the elevator with Hawk and a prisoner was taking them back to the hostage room. Suddenly, Emily grabbed the fire extinguisher mounted on the wall and hit the prisoner right in the face with it. Taking advantage of the situation, Hawk attacked the prisoner. But as soon as the elevator doors opened, Snow was standing right in front of them. The prisoner punched Snow hard, threw him out of the elevator, and after a brief struggle, grabbed him by the neck and slammed him against the wall. Then Snow quickly placed some bombs around the man's neck and set off a massive explosion. Just then, Emily came back and attacked Snow with a fire extinguisher, thinking that he was also an enemy. Then she ran away with Hawk and locked themselves in a secure room. As soon as the room was sealed, Emily's telemetry device gave a nitrogen alert. Outside the room, Snow was telling Langral and Shaw what had happened, but just then, Alex and his men came out of the elevator. Because of this, Snow had to hide. Eventually, they found the room where Emily was hiding. Now Alex told his men to go and capture the two engineers. Let's get this girl out right now. Meanwhile, Snow was sneaking around the ship and reached a computer. There, he searched for the location of the maze. He also found out about Emily's oxygen problem. But since the room was locked, he couldn't figure out what to do. Meanwhile, two engineers arrived outside the locked room. Then Alex shot one of them so that the other would cooperate, and that's exactly what happened. Meanwhile, Snow was crawling inside the ship's AC duct, but he didn't know that a prisoner was following him. Eventually, he reached the ship's torsion system, which creates gravity on the ship like on Earth. As soon as he slid forward, the prisoner pounced on him. Then both of them started fighting while floating in the air. Snow pushed him hard and grabbed the edge of the exit, but the prisoner grabbed his leg. Meanwhile, Heidel, sitting in the control room, was watching all this on camera. He immediately fired at the controls and shut down the torsion system. Now, as soon as the gravity disappeared, it became difficult for Snow to hang on. Then he shot the prisoner and got him off. But suddenly the rope snapped and he started falling straight down. But just then, Shaw's people reactivated the torsion system and Snow slid out exactly according to the plan. Meanwhile, inside the secure room, Emily and Hawk were listening to the noises outside, where people were trying their best to break down the door. The engineer who was trying to open the door failed. Now, as soon as a new engineer was called to take his place, Alex shot the previous one without hesitation. Anyway, the oxygen inside was about to run out. The situation had gotten so bad that Hawk sacrificed his life so that the remaining oxygen would last longer for Emily. Meanwhile, Snow was still crawling through the shafts. Finally, he found the room and blasted open the shaft cover to make his entry. When he saw Emily, she had already lost consciousness, but Shaw had a medical kit with him. Following a doctor's instructions, he somehow managed to bring Emily back to consciousness. As soon as Emily regained consciousness, she was startled and pushed Snow away forcefully. Then Snow calmly said that he was there to help her. He then took her out through the shaft. But before leaving, he left a bomb for Alex and his men. As soon as they entered the room, there was a loud explosion. Somehow, Shaw's voice, who was guiding Emily and Snow, could now be heard by all the prisoners as well. Then Alex called a communicator officer over to him. Alex told him to cut the signal or else he would cut his throat. Now, without Shaw's guidance, Snow and Emily turned the wrong way and ended up crashing through the ceiling into an unknown room. Still, they didn't stop and soon reached a medical room. There, Snow treated Emily's wounds and also told her that her father, the president, had sent him. Then Emily asked, "What about the others? They've also been captured." Snow replied bluntly that he was only there to save her. He said he didn't care about the others. When Emily didn't agree, Snow handed her a map and a gun, saying, "If you're so worried about everyone, then go and save them yourself." But Emily just couldn't figure out where she actually was. Just then, a message from Alex appeared on every screen of the ship. He showed a photo of Emily's ID and ordered everyone that if they saw her, they should capture her. Seeing this, Snow felt sorry for her and told her not to worry so much and to stay with him. After that, the two of them entered a storeroom. Here, Snow gave Emily a prisoner's uniform and forcibly cut and dyed her hair so they could hide her identity. He also gave Emily a cap and then suddenly punched her in the face to create another mark so that she would be completely unrecognizable. Meanwhile, on the police officer's ship, Langral was talking to Alex. At that moment, Alex openly said that he knew who Emily was. He said, "If you don't meet our demands, you'll suffer great losses." A few hours later, the president also arrived there. Now Snow had also put on a prisoner's uniform. After that, he took Emily to the main containment area. At first, they blended into the crowd so well that no one suspected a thing. But further ahead, they reached a place where a password was required. Obviously, they didn't know what it was. Then, to handle the situation, Snow hit a prisoner hard and started to run away. Seeing this, the other prisoners started chasing after him. Meanwhile, Snow was running while firing his gun. But Emily got stuck in a jammed door. Then Snow told her to handle the gun, while he himself started trying to force the door open. On the other side of the door, Mace was waiting. Now the three of them entered another room and locked it. Snow hugged Mace, but Mace just kept repeating nonsense. Then Emily explained that since he had been asleep for so many days, it had affected his memory. When Mace was asked about the briefcase, he started talking strangely again. Just then, they heard that Alex and his men were trying to open the door with a special tool. After that, the three of them immediately escaped from there. Now Alex thought that he had finally reached them. But where the sound was coming from, there was only an alarm. Snow had left it there to mislead them. But in the midst of all this, the MS-1 ship started losing control and crashed straight into the International Space Station. Now the situation had become even more dangerous. Because of the collision, there was a malfunction in the spaceship's hull and Mace got separated from the others. Snow told him to press the panic button, but Mace just couldn't understand what he was saying. So Snow went out to look for something to open the door. Meanwhile, Emily listened to more of Mace's incoherent ramblings. But when Snow came back, it turned out that opening the door was impossible and Mace had frozen to death in the cold. Meanwhile, on the police ship, Langral was informed that MS-1 would collide with Earth in about 6 hours. So he decided to call the Department of Justice with a plan. Meanwhile, Snow and Emily finally reached the pod room. There, they saw that government ships were approaching them, but not to rescue them. The pod they found had only one seat. So Snow lied to Emily, telling her, "I have another pod. I'll come with its help." Then the pod was launched, but just moments later, Emily appeared standing behind Snow. She knew that as long as she stayed on the ship, her father would not authorize the attack, because she still wanted to save innocent people. Meanwhile, Snow didn't really want to help. But Emily lied and changed his mind, saying that Mace had told her the location of the briefcase before he died. Just then, Heidel appeared on the ship's screens and threatened that if Emily didn't reveal her location, he would kill a hostage every 3 seconds. So Emily was forced to give up her location. But Heidel still killed all the innocent people. Then Snow pulled her into the elevator so they could escape from there. And then Emily told the truth that she didn't know the location of the briefcase. Now the elevator got stuck between floors, so Snow forced the doors open. Then both of them jumped into a room where they found evidence that experiments were being conducted on the prisoners. But just then, Alex and his men arrived there. Snow tried to escape, but a bullet sent him falling into the shafts. After this, Alex took Emily back to the control room. Meanwhile, when Snow regained consciousness in the shaft, Shaw contacted him using a private line. Shaw first asked about Mace and then explained how to get out of there. Meanwhile, in the control room, Alex was talking to Langral. Langral was threatening him with an attack. Alex told Emily to ask her father to call off the attack. But Emily said that the entire prison should be blown up. Only monsters are left here now. But even then, the president refused to authorize the attack. After that, Langral used constitutional rules to remove them from their posts, because the president was putting his personal matters above the country. After that, Langral gave permission for the attack. When Alex and Heidel saw the ships approaching, a fierce fight broke out between them. Heidel stabbed his own brother and was chasing after Emily. But at exactly the right moment, Snow arrived there and knocked Heidel unconscious. Here, the MS-1 security ships were facing gunfire and the prisoners were chasing them. At that moment, Snow took Emily into a room. This was the room Shaw had told him about. Now, both of them locked the door, put on special spacesuits and jumped off the ship just before it exploded. The force of the explosion pushed them so hard that they landed directly on Earth. There, the police found them and finally rescued Emily. Then Snow was arrested again. A few days later, Emily was in a hospital bed when a quote written on her tablet made her understand everything. Now she understood Mace's last words. That means now she really knew the location of the briefcase. Emily immediately left the hospital, went straight to the station, and decoded the number hidden in Mace's words. With the help of that number, she opened the correct locker and finally got the briefcase. After this, she also went to the motel room, and that's where we found out what really happened that day. Snow fired his gun at the exact moment when a hidden attacker shot at the colonel. And Langral, who was watching everything from the roof of the adjacent building, thought that Snow was the one who fired the shot. Then Emily gave the briefcase to her father and said that he had to do something. After this, we see the detention center where Shaw had come to meet Snow. Then a police officer brought the briefcase to Shaw so that it could be shown to Snow. Snow explained that the colonel wasn't selling secrets, he was actually returning them. But when Shaw opened the briefcase, it turned out to be completely empty. Snow immediately said that this was very strange. How did you know the password beforehand? Then it is revealed that Shaw was an informant and Langral had arrived there to arrest him. Now that his innocence had been proven, Snow was finally released from the detention center. He was just about to light a cigarette when he discovered that there was a secret SD card hidden inside the lighter. And this was the real thing that the colonel had said must